Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. Good to have you guys with us once again.
Oh, I love the familiar faces. Hi, Joffrey. Hi, Breakout from the Prison Planet. Judy K. Ozboy. Brian Harris. Grizz. Rawr.
Okay, that was a weak one.
Okay.
Gotta build up a little bit more.
Give me a few minutes. I'll do it in a little bit.
Okay. So, yeah, great to see you guys. Interesting stuff. This is the type of stuff that I've always been fascinated with. I've always been I was a weird kid. I was really a weird kid at, about 8 or 9 years old. I was grabbing almanacs and just reading them from cover to cover, delving deep into the history books. Every year when we got our history book, as I love history, I would have it finished in like the first couple of days. The entire year's worth of work. I would just pour through it and devour it. Just like this craving for more and more knowledge, insatiable craving for knowledge. And Cindy's nodding her head and she's saying it's all in the stars, probably.
Yeah, it is. Well, a lot of it, but there's that insatiable appetite, that hunger, that thirst for knowledge. Once you get a taste of awakening, there's no going back. And then luckily these days we do have the internet, so the rabbit hole can go almost as deep as we want.
S&P 156 says you're a pretty weird adult too. Well, thank you. That's good in this world. And that wasn't a beer, guys, because I would never drink a beer out of a can. Right. It was actually carbonated water. Where was I going?
You got the compliment.
Oh, yeah, because in this world, to be normal is to be insane in some ways, or either that or just kind of clueless.
Yeah, I think so. Normal is, perceptions. Normal is what we've been conditioned to believe. And then they put us in these boxes, especially if we are different. And then they mark us for, I don't know, not nice things anyway.
So one of the things that always fascinated me also was like tribal migrations. Why are there differences between the races? One of the things that I never bought was the whole idea that, certain geographic locations are going to make humans look a certain way. Obviously, we get a tan when we go down to somewhere it's got a lot of sunshine, doesn't necessarily have to be by the equator, just as long as there's a lot of sunshine, but there's still differences. And of course, I know a lot of you guys in the chat room are probably thinking it's because we come, and this would sound crazy to the mainstream, we come from different star systems ultimately, and there's all different seeding of life that has gone on this planet, as this planet is perhaps a big petri dish experiment in so many ways.
It is. And to go down the rabbit hole of, your galactic history and stuff is a very interesting one, because I do believe the more we know about our history, the better off we are. The more we know about ourselves, the more effective we can be in helping other people figure out who they are.
So, trying to, have a little lightheartedness and break from all the news and stuff, I've been, taking Cindy through some classics that she's never even seen. And it blows my mind that she hasn't seen some of these classics, such as, The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings, how do you not, either have read or never seen The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Tolkien. And, it's fascinating because, that really is going into our mythology. And, the movies that were made of the books has brought it to our, modern consciousness. Some of the legends, especially of the Tuatha Dé Danann and all these other beings, the fairies, the elves, the dwarves, the different races, the different types of humanoid beings that have been on this planet. Because, man, if we could only, can you imagine if we could like reanimate one of every type of humanoid being that's ever lived on this planet, what do you think that would look like?
I think that's a pretty awesome question and a pretty cool proposal to even wonder about something like that. And I think, like, when we watch these movies and stuff, and when you're watching a show and you get kind of excited and butterflies are in your tummy and you're like, oh wow, I think that's more of a DNA awakening.
Yeah, and DNA is fascinating in and of itself. And I shared with you guys, I got my genetic, history tested by 23andMe, which I know is, Big Brother's database to know everything about us. And I understand that, but that was years ago when I got it done at the request of my naturopathic doctor that just wanted to see, because she was all into genetics. And, like we've seen, people go to the extreme. You saw, what's her name? Angelina Jolie. I mean, she chopped her breasts off because of a genetic tendency. Now, they could check things and know, you are so inclined to probably get this disease or that disease or all sorts of things, all sorts of things they could test genetically now. And they do. And, I know they're watching a lot of us really closely, because I personally think that the powers that be, maybe even they have the power, or at least their cohorts, to know who is coming into incarnation, and know, okay, well, this was that troublemaker back then that tried to teach people the truth of what's going on, so we got to watch this person. And DNA goes beyond the physical body. It's actually out into the etheric as well, which is all fascinating too.
It is fascinating, and I think that we do have the technology. At least I bet you anything, somebody has the technology to pull up an animated version on a computer of every humanoid species on the planet, and boy, that would be fun information.
It sure would. And there's some interesting connections, too. And it's like Sweetgrass is talking about, she found some interesting connections between the Tuatha and the Bean eggs in her research, and also in Irish and Cherokee. I do think there's truth to Atlantis and Lemuria. It feels like there's truth there. I know there's a great difference in timelines between what certain people, certain scholars believe, and we've found so much strange stuff out here in the West, and I found a lot of really cool things, also in the Carolinas and Georgia as well, with our traditions, our stories, our hidden history. There was great destruction out here, that we know, and we found so many relics. We're finding relics all the time, as we've now got a 12-foot deep hole that eventually will be about 10 feet in level. Right now it's not so level, in the yard in which we're going to be building our underground bunker house. It's the Earthbag Dome house. So, you keep coming across things, and we keep coming across things that are just curious and interesting. Some stuff that looks like it might be pottery shards, perhaps, or who knows what else, maybe the tooth of a giant, which I don't know where that went, but it's around here somewhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, you might pick up a rock and it might be a white rock, but then when you look closer, it has those little pores in it that you usually see in bones. And Sassy, she's one of our more sensitive pooches, and if it passes the Sassy lick test, we know it's got to be a bone, because if you put it in front of that little girl and she licks it, then she's tasting something. So that's curious.
Yeah, as Calvin says, how far back does our history really go? That's a great question, because you got all different answers on that, and I mean, we see the mines in South Africa. Michael Tellinger's talked about that. He's talked about Adam's calendar as well. Somebody was working the mines before Homo sapiens was according to timelines. And how old is Homo sapiens? as well.
Oh, thank you, Miss Kimberly. Thank you, thank you. Remember to click on the thumbs up, she says. Thank you.
Thank you, dear sister. You know we love you. And when things get to be somewhat normal again, as long as they're going to allow us to cross borders, we'll be heading back over to Shasta. We love the area. We got great vibes there. It had really, it was a kind of a game changer. It was a level up, it felt like.
It was like we got plugged into the crystal grid somehow for some interesting way. And what was really cool is even Zeke leveled up, because he was such a quiet boy. He'd never say anything, never ask anything, but now he's talking.
And he sings, and I'm going to do a video of that too. I will do a video of that. He actually sings now, and I'm not kidding you guys. And Sweetgrass gave a great answer to Calvin. Our history is as old as the universe itself. Yeah, because I do believe that who we are, our essence, our souls, that's the spiritual. Well, it's all spiritual when you get down to it, even the physical spiritual. So it's all the same stuff, just vibrating at different, frequencies. The universe is mind stuff, as some of the great minds from the 20s and 30s that gave us quantum physics discovered. Gosh, almost 100 years ago now. It's been 100 years of quantum physics coming in. That's pretty interesting. And, what did it verify? Just that the mystical side of things is pretty real, and a lot of the Eastern systems apparently got it pretty spot on, in so many ways. So when we look at these beings, and, one thing to keep in mind is, and we see this throughout history, sometimes, and when we come in from a tribal setting, the gods of my enemy, quote unquote, can become demons to that other tribe, so to speak, when they're in conflict and all. The history is just fascinating to try to piece together and see what's really, really going on. So the Tuatha Dé Danann, they are kind of perhaps what Tolkien based the elves upon, and also, the other legends. There's so many legends, and of course we have legends of druids as well. I've gone through all different phases through my life. There was after going through the fundamentalist phase, which I never really bought, honestly, because it always just hit me as just doesn't feel like it's on. It feels like it's missing the point. It's missing some major things. Then I went into more of connecting to the earth phase. And then I realized that everything traces back really to like a shamanistic point of view. And, that's really our oldest, quote unquote, religion or spirituality, is really going back to shamanism.
Yeah, to me, that's where it's at too. The Native Americans, all the natives, they knew how to work with the earth and work with the ether, and that's something that I've been working with as well, learning processes and learning things to work with the ether to, encourage good for one's health to come about, or something, and they've kind of taken shamanism and they've demonized it, making it something, if you can see things or if you work with the ether, you must be evil. And that's in our mainstream, and that's part of what they want to call normalcy, is for people to not accept other people's ways of doing things.
And we see what it's led to in history with so many massacres and genocides, and it's really sad. So the term Tuatha Dé Danann, it means basically those of the goddess Danu, the people of the goddess Danu. So who is Danu? And so, thoughts differ in some. Some people have connected Danu, taken a D off and go to Anu and try to connect it to, the Sumerians again. Although Anu is male and Danu is definitely female. Now, there is also in India, in the Vedic tradition, Danu, and is actually an Asura. So let me just show you this picture. Who are these people? Well, typically, they were either blonde or red-haired. They were tall and pale-skinned, green or blue-eyed. That is their description. So a lot like the Nordic people that we see, really. So is there a connection then for those of us that would be more inclined to think that we are living in a real true galactic neighborhood with a lot of different civilizations? Is there Pleiadian connections, perhaps? Because we see them, in a very quote-unquote Nordic light.
That's what I think, and I think they're very, very careful to keep our history away from us, or maybe not so much keep it away from us, but try to make it seem like it's outlandish, or they're just myths or just stories.
So, this is one perspective. Everybody has their own perspective. There's a lot of battles in our history. We see this world, it is like this world has been fought over by different parties that are perhaps at odds with each other, even off planet.
Oh my gosh, Grizzly says, see, Mike is a shaman. He got a bear to donate human money. That's a good trick. That's a good trick. And Joffrey, thank you so much for your support too.
Thank you so much, brothers. We appreciate you. You guys are awesome. And it's beautiful how we get to be deeper friends. It just feels like we're all connecting more and more and more. So, the headline here is the Tuatha Dé Danann, the tribe that fought against the Anunnaki. And everything is really, really, really jumbled. And I've spent my whole life really trying to decipher all the jumbling of everything going on. And, I've had some mystical type of experiences that let me know, so to speak, that, there really are ETs and also interdimensional beings that can manipulate this realm and be here and then be gone in front of your very eyes. But I also think that a lot of, there really could be a connection to Atlantis too, is basically that perhaps, some of the things that we were in awe of was just really advanced technology of definitely humanoid beings. And perhaps, those that survived Atlantis maintained a much higher level of technology and didn't lose the memories that we lost of everything, the ones that were on the surface, or, because we have the legends of people going into the earth. And if you look at it, and I was planning on doing a video as well, if you look at some of the Native American legends, Hopis and others, not the last one, not the ending of the previous world, but before that, if you look at it closely, it's like we were boarded on ships and taken to another planet. You could really read it that way as well. So that makes me wonder about the whole Mars thing as well. Were we on Mars before we were here even? Was Mars inhabited and Mars got toasted? And the whole Tiamat thing. And it hit me when we were out hiking and we're looking at all these hills that look like they could be giants lying there. Maybe the Titans were actually the beings that originally inhabited Tiamat. Because Tiamat was supposedly pretty large, and the Earth is a leftover remnant of Tiamat.
Miss Morticia, thank you. She says, hello, EEA. Hello, Miss Morticia. Hope you're doing well. And I do believe these things about our history. I think the truth of it is really interesting, far more interesting than what they give us in our textbooks. What they give us in our textbooks is just information to help us be batteries to help run their society. And anything that might empower us, anything that might make us feel strong, important, special, anything that might actually help us trace our lineage for real, that's just looked on as, fairy tales and not really true information, just something to write a story about. And I just don't think that's a very nice thing to do.
And I think things are really twisted too. And Mercy Anonymous says, aren't the giants supposed to wake up? Yeah, we hear that. We do hear that. I think there's way more than one race of giants as well. And then there's the thought that who were the giants? That we were the giants, perhaps, our spirits in bigger bodies back when everything was bigger, because we see that everything has gotten smaller over time on the earth, as the whole atmosphere has changed here. One time we had a lot more oxygen, and the planet was warmer than it is now. So it's all pretty fascinating, really. Let's see, where was I going? Okay. So these tall and bright creatures brought with them secret knowledge of the gods. And Ireland, basically was conquered by one wave of invaders after another. And, Robert Seffer, Atlantean Gardens is like, my new favorite channel, because I just love all this stuff. Love it, love it, love it. And I always have, I've been digging into this stuff since I was a kid. And so in Irish mythology, it is said that the Tuatha Dé Danann is a race of kings descended from the heavens to the ancient pre-Celtic culture. These tall and bright creatures brought with them the secret knowledge of the gods. And so, what exactly is the case? Because sometimes they're thought of as being more like elves, and being more like of the fairy realm, the Devic realm. See, this all is connected, because we have the Devas in Hinduism as well. And the Devic realm is a large realm. So you have little elementals that are, basically their job is just taking care of plants. And then there's elementals in our bodies, and their job is taking care of us, maintaining a balance in us. And then yet in that same classification of beings, as the elementals go through their spiritual evolution, they eventually become things that are like, godlike, angelic, and even like the archangels themselves at the highest levels. So they kind of grow.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting too, about the different dimensions and the different things that are out there, and all the different ways we can really do stuff and study stuff. And I think this literature, I believe it's where it's at. There is a lot hidden here that I feel would truly benefit us. That's why Hidden Histories is like one of my most favorite subjects. I think somewhere deep in my DNA, my body knows something that's very, very true about it. And just like you guys might feel the same way, there's a truth ring to this.
And we see this statement here. There's a lot of similarities between the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Nephilims. So it's interesting, really, to go into this in depth. So again, it roughly translates to the people or the children of the goddess Danu. And everything gets twisted, as we know, over time, especially when there's competition that goes on. Like, especially as Christianity spread, Christianity basically took everybody's gods and goddesses and made them all into demons, because, it's competition. And as we know, the church was all about control through, every way, the power, it's, and if you grew up a Catholic, it's all fear of hellfire and damnation because you were born a sinner, and because you were born, you should be thrown in hellfire forever and just be tormented forever because you were born. The whole original sin because of, Adam and Eve's transgression, which to me is absolutely ridiculous and never made a little lick of sense. But everybody has their own opinion. So we see Danu as well in the Vedic tradition. And let's see over here. Danu and Danavas. Okay, Danavas translates literally to enemies of the gods. Who are the Asuras? Now it's curious too, because when you get into the Hindu traditions, it's not so clear, because you will have, I just thought I saw like something go by here. Because you will have asuras, which literally is basically the kind of demon race that can become good and even relatively benevolent. And they are at war with the gods, the devas. So the devas and the asuras are usually at war with each other. But sometimes there's even loves that develop between a deva and an asura. So it's really, it feels like there's something else truly going on here, and that these beings are beings. They're beings,
They are, truly. And Miss Angela, thank you so much. She says, good luck with your homestead, and I shall follow vicariously from my apartment. That's wonderful. Cool. And then Grizzly says, Mike, are all Nephilim evil?
One of the things is I think that's super twisted. And I go back to part of the logic is, okay, what thought system dominates the world? Well, it's the traditional thought system that comes out of the church. And even if you look at going over to Islam, it comes out of the Bible too. And again, the Bible is very incomplete. It's so incomplete. And, early Christianity had over 200 gospels, and we have 4 that have been heavily redacted. And as I've shared, like the Gospel of John, which is the most beautiful gospel, and it is the most Gnostic influenced of the gospels. The oldest copy that we have of that, which it goes to around, I want to say about, they think anywhere between 225 AD and maybe 300 AD. And it has over 1,000 edits to it, where you could tell, some words are scribbled out, and some are changed. So it's been heavily redacted, and then think, well, who's in control of this reality? Well, it's been the same powers that be for thousands of years, really. It's the same bloodlines. We could trace them back to ancient Rome. We could trace them back over to Sumeria. And so, whose version are we getting? Well, I think we're getting their version. And they've hidden a lot of the good stuff that would really enlighten us. So, especially when we found other books, like the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi, just for instance, and there's so much more. You got to study every system in order to get a clear picture. You're never going to get a clear picture just looking at one side of things. It's just not going to happen. So here we see that they were the descendants of Kasyapa by his wife Danu, hence their name. So they're a class of mythological giants. In the epic period, they were probably personifications of the Aborigines of India. In the Pranic period, they are regarded as the inhabitants of Patala and the enemies of the gods. And so it says the Daityas. And again, this is Asuras. So, these things do kind of go together. Now, are we really just simply talking about beings that have been at war with each other maybe for tens of thousands of years, maybe for hundreds of thousands of years, and we're just one little battlefront on a bigger battle?
We really are, and there's so much information to sift through. And Grizzly here says, I was taught by a very smart pastor that said that God knows your heart and intentions. You run information through your God filter to discern the truth, and that's what you do. And I think that's part of where our DNA awakens too, when we are reading stuff and something touches our energy. Yeah, that's how that works, I think.
Yeah, great comments, guys. Great comments. Calvin says maybe the creator likes us to figure stuff out like detectives. Exactly. This is most definitely a big puzzle going on. And it's fascinating stuff. There's most definitely connections between Ireland and India. And there's more connections than even that too. So it's fascinating stuff. Here you see the Celtic Vedic connection. So the Celtic people, spread from their homeland, what's now Germany, across Europe in the first millennium BCE. Iron tools and weapons rendered them superior to their neighbors. And there's differences too in the physical stature, and it's fascinating to look at this and wonder, especially when you start getting into genetics and haplogroups. It's really interesting. They declined after the Roman Empire, came around and just kept pushing them back farther and farther and farther. So you could see here, Peter Beresford Ellis, one of Europe's foremost experts of the Celts, explains how modern research has revealed amazing similarities between ancient Celt and Vedic culture. The Celts' priestly caste, the Druids, became part of modern folklore. Their identity is claimed by New Age enthusiasts, likely to appear at annual solstice gatherings around ancient megaliths in northwest Europe. While sincerely motivated by a desire to resurrect Europe's ancient spiritual ways, Ellis says the modern Druids draw more upon fanciful reconstruction of the 18th century than actual scholarship going back farther. Somebody put up all those ancient structures, and there are some that are much more ancient than Stonehenge even. And so it's interesting, really, to look at this. They were the first civilization north of the European Alps to emerge in recorded history. At the time of their greatest expansion in the 3rd century BCE, the Celts stretched from Ireland in the west, through the central plain of Turkey in the east, north from Belgium down to Cadiz in southern Spain, and across the Alps into the Po Valley of Italy. They even impinged on areas of Poland and the Ukraine, and if the amazing recent discovery of mummies in China's province of Xinjiang are linked with the Tocharian texts, they even moved as far east as the area north of Tibet. Now, there's a lot of legends also about after Atlantis was destroyed, where did the survivors go? And, it's interesting, too, to start getting into Shambhala and Agartha and that whole thing. And really, are we talking about survivors of Atlantis here? It's fascinating to look at in that light.
It is. And, seeking the truth is like, it should be like one of our most favorite things to do, so that we can really discern. Truly discern, because some things we are conditioned for. We have this conditioning about us through society, and it might, you might try to discern, but depending on how you're conditioned, that might change that discernment. So I just really have this craving for the truth.
And so you see some linguistic similarities, and there's even some words that are pretty much the same. As we were talking about Danu, here you have a goddess, and then you have an asura. So interesting, really, really interesting. And you got to wonder. I think there's a commonality here with all of this, and perhaps it really is linked to the survivors of Atlantis. What if, there were, well, just look at today. If you look at some Aboriginal people, whether it's in Australia or you see some of the tribes down in the Amazon River Basin, they're still living like they're in the Stone Age. What if there was that type of disparity as there is today between those tribes living that way and us now? Maybe even greater, going back 10, 12,000 years, or maybe it's not even 10, 12,000 years. Maybe it's more like 3,600, 4,000 years. Pretty interesting stuff. Now, the other thing about the Vedic point of view is the Vimanas. Most people that has studied at all Vedic history are familiar with Vimanas, these flying ships. And there's tremendous descriptions, there's pictures of them. And this is what the Tuatha Dé Danann used to arrive in Ireland, flying ships. Again, I wonder, was it just leftover people from Atlantis that were scattered? And, perhaps that's why we have these similarities. And that's why we find, apparent Caucasian mummies in China, and there's more Caucasian mummies in China than most people would realize. There's a cover-up going on there, and you're usually red-haired as well.
Mm-hmm. And could you guys just imagine, and maybe this is something we ought to meditate on a little bit, what would our world look like if we were told the truth? If we knew something to be true? I mean, that would change the whole landscape of like everything. It would be so different.
Many of you guys might know, that there's, for instance, you could find a lot of things that come out of the Bible, like the commandments, for instance, and you could see that there's ancient Egyptian roots there. And again, I feel like that, again, is another culture that's a leftover remnant of a much more advanced society. And again, perhaps Atlantean, perhaps something else. But we find these similarities. We find where the originals came from, because, what we've been told is not really the case. And, the originals have been covered up in most cases, or just recently, discovered relatively, such as like the laws of Manu. And, there's so much to look into there. And unfortunately, not enough people are versed in looking at all these different aspects where we start to really see there's so much connectedness here. So Indian Vimanas and Irish flying ships, that's another just wild connection there. So how long did we have the ability to fly? Airplanes, UFOs. When you look into Nazi Germany, they were way ahead technologically, but they were all about discovering our ancient history, and that's what they did. I mean, look at Raiders of the Lost Ark. It is kind of based on fact. Nazi Germany was going around looking for the spear of Longinus that pierced the side of Christ. They were looking for the Holy Grail. They were looking for all these other artifacts. And as we know, so much stuff is in the Vatican and the Smithsonian. Boy, if we ever got our hands on everything that they have ever had, it would be just an amazing thing to pour through. So they were contacted. They made contact with these beings that were Nord-like beings. But recognize, too, when we see the Draco, and we know that the Draco have greys working underneath them, that's their worker bees. And then there's also many reports that there are conquered Nordic alien types that are kind of enslaved to the Draco. So when we look at how Nazi Germany, the Nazis, I should just say the Nazis, Operation Paperclip, because we have quite a few here now. It's pretty obvious. They were all about rediscovering perhaps ancient technology. And how did they get so far ahead with the Nazi, with the Nazi bell? They had saucer machines, saucer-like craft that they were working on back in the 30s and getting them off the ground. And then we know about Admiral Byrd going down to Antarctica, New Schwabenland, right? And the Nazi base down there and getting his butt kicked by UFOs, flying saucer type things. So it's pretty easy to look at the Indian Vimanas and the Irish flying ships and think that, again, this is leftover technology, whether you view it from an ET perspective or perhaps, an Atlantean perspective, as far as, where it really came from. It was there. Mm-hmm. It still is.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that we don't, that we haven't been able to comb through. And I think one of the things they do to us in our society is we have to work these jobs that keep us, barely ahead. And we don't have the time to go through this information, which I think is like critical. So it is really nice that Michael does know so much and he can go through this information and bring it to us. And I think that's what real education should look like. You should be able to be exposed to all of these things, not just be so tired and exhausted from work, all you want to do is go home and put your feet up. No, it's good to see some truth, some things to ponder, and some things to understand.
So when they got to Ireland, the Fomorians were the people that were already there, and that was the tribe they were going to battle. And so they arrived in Ireland in their flying ships. The dominant tribe of Ireland at that time was the Fomorians, and they are said to have created an energy field of some sort to keep invaders out. The flying ships had to encircle Ireland 9 times before they eventually found a way through the energy field and were able to land at the Iron Mountain. And that reminds me of the story of Joshua circling Jericho and blowing the horn before the walls go down. I think there's a lot of these similarities, and people have wondered if that really did happen. Was that tech, given to you from somebody that was more advanced again? And again, when you look at the Israelites being led out of Egypt and towards the Promised Land, and then you have what really could be like a UFO encounter. It just makes you wonder, and there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. So once they managed to land in Ireland, said that they used iron from the mountain to forge superior weapons and armor, and then they burned the flying ships to make a point to the Fomorians that they intended to stay. In the ensuing battles, the Tuatha were victorious and ruled Ireland for many generations. But were these beings gods? Well, I mean, one of the gods got his arm cut off, so obviously physical, beings as well. And so, again, this ties in. It's so intriguing that Danu is both an Irish and a Hindu goddess. Well, technically, in the Vedic literature, there's a tribe of Asuras, which are called Danavas, who are known as the sons of Danu. Interesting stuff, fascinating stuff, and here you see it again, Danu and Asura. Interesting stuff with these connections, and the Druids and the Brahmins, and there's more connections than most people would recognize. All right, so Brahmins from Brahma. How about Abraham? Abraham. Brahmins, Brahma, Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu. Interesting. Is there a connection there as well? And have you ever heard of the term sitting Shiva in Hebrew? It's a period of mourning, and Shiva is the god of kind of death and destruction. In some ways, the masculine counterpart of Kali. And there's so much more depth to all this. We could get into so much, tearing apart all this stuff. Fascinating stuff. So just like in Tolkien's books, eventually where do they go? They went to the west. They disappear off into the west and under the earth and into the earth. And there's so much here. There's truth in these legends. It's just a matter of trying to decipher them, and they're all interconnected. It's so interconnected. It's just fascinating stuff.
And it does make you sit and ponder and wonder, well, who exactly were the gods? What are they like? It brings me back to thinking about Westworld when I saw that, and about how they're programmable, and how consciousness kind of took over and started to take charge, and they would talk about the gods, which were really just the humans going there for the experience, but definitely gives you something to think about.
And so if these beings were truly higher density, or it's just spirits, or just nature forces personified, we have these battles described, and you see the king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, Nuada, led his people to victory in the war, but lost an arm when one of the fur bolgs sliced it off. So sounds pretty fleshy to me, and they're thought of as deities. But I think, again, when we talk about this, this is all messed up too, because, they're not source or prime creator. They're, again, an individual. Each one of them are individuals. So, we're calling them deities. Maybe we should call them, more of your, ruling class. Think of them more in the terms of kings and queens and knights, perhaps. And, again, kingship was given to us from above, it says in the Bible, right? And it also says it in the Sumerian legends, from above our heads, comes out of the sky.
Things that make you go,
So they were said to have been skilled in magic. And what is magic, really? It's the art and science of making the material conform to intent. That's what it is. So when we know our power and we understand our co-creative ability, because all of us, we all have source in us. So we all have an amazing ability in us to manifest, and we understand how the world works, through quantum physics. It's all about intent. It's all about recognizing the power within. How do you keep people from being empowered? Well, you tell them right off the bat that, well, because you're born, you should be eternally tormented. And so that's obviously a mindset that's going to inhibit the growth. And obviously also, when everything is a demon around every corner ready to get you, it'll keep people on the narrow path, and it'll keep them from asking questions. It'll keep them from learning.
Mm-hmm. And Grizzly says, what if we were the gods, Westworld at first, then something happened to free us? Yes, I see so much information in Westworld. It just rang so true to me. I mean, creepy true. And, what if it really is like that, and consciousness did take hold, and we really are programmable? That's why I talk about, when I do the tuning forks, that we're going to program the energy body, because I believe that we can.
As this says, so who were the Tuatha Dé Danann? Were they Irish gods or aliens? And, I think a lot of us are coming to the conclusion that perhaps we're all aliens to this planet when you get down to it, or at least partly, and so I think our DNA is so mixed. We have so much in us, and that's probably part of why we have such conflict in us, as well. So, of course, Christian monks started writing down the Irish history, but they had an agenda. They wanted to promote the church. They wanted to promote Christianity. So obviously they would, unfortunately, perhaps paint things in a more negative light than they really were. So it's interesting. So the Danann ruled from 1897 BC till 1700 BC, which is really not long. That's just, a couple hundred years, short period indeed for such fame. Only a couple hundred years, and then they were gone. And so if we're looking at that, we're looking back about 3,700 to about 3,900 years ago. Curious. It is curious. And does seem to have some timeline congruity with what we see going on over in Sumeria, and with all the wars with the Anunnaki going on between the different factions, as well as also when we look at some of the myths too, and we see that some of the factions left Mesopotamia and went off to the Americas, and perhaps went off to other places as well.
I mean, to me, all of this stuff makes sense. And when I was going to school, grade school, and middle school and stuff, the stuff that they were feeding me, it just wouldn't stick. It didn't resonate. It's like it's being forced fed. This stuff for me, when I look at it, read it, not only is it fascinating, it just makes sense to me. It just does.
So there's always been this thought in India of a Aryan invasion from the north, and that your Brahmin and your top classes are those invaders that took over. The people of southern India have ties to Ethiopia, which is interesting enough, and genetically that it shows that they migrated from Ethiopia over to India, the people of southern India. And when you look to southern India, the people have more pigmentation. They're darker, slightly different skeletal structure. And when we see the northern Indians, then you'll see some blue eyes popping up here and there, lighter skin, But the DNA, test so far hasn't really shown that that's really the case. And then there's a big line of thought now in India that the whole Aryan invasion is just a myth as well. So, but if you look into Harappa, that's some fascinating stuff that we need to delve into as well. I think that when we look back, I personally feel that the Indus Valley civilization perhaps even predated the Sumerian civilization, and perhaps even over into Persia as well, and into Pakistan. It's interesting to look at it, and it's a different culture as well. Like, we find something we don't find anywhere else really in Harappa, in that people seem to live under a totally different system. I think that what we have is the Sumerian system, the Anunnaki system. There, they found that people lived differently. They didn't have the same sort of economy. They didn't even, worship gods the way that everybody else seems to worship these gods. The whole structure of society was of something that we should start to study in depth, and maybe it's a way we could go, where there's actual equality and freedoms with no central authority. And that was, unfortunately, put down, as we've found. Every culture, one after another, gets put down by the same sort of societal structure that we see that in our modern history we think comes out of Sumeria, but perhaps it's here.
Perhaps it is, and I think this stuff is fascinating too, and I really wish that they would teach this in school. To me, this is probably the number one most important thing anybody could learn. And as far as, the order of things and the way things should go, obviously, what we're doing now isn't working too great. It would be enlightening to see how these other structures were put together, how they solved, social problems, and how they dealt with certain things. It just seems like it would be a better way.
So what was the timeline of Atlantis? If we go by Plato, you're talking about 9600 BC. So we're talking 11,600, 11,700 years ago, which does go perfectly with the Younger Dryas die-off. So that seems to be very, very logical and something that would fit in there. Now, modern science has basically tied it into the Greek island of Santorini, which was destroyed by a volcanic eruption 1600 BC. Now, 1600 BC, that's not too far off from the invasion of the Tuatha Dé Danann, because we were talking, in that time frame again. I think, for me, if I had to bet on it, I would say it's the Younger Dryas period that Atlantis went down. But, people, again, we could debate that, and it's fascinating to look at. It really, really is fascinating to look at. And unfortunately, the cover-up is so big that it's so hard to really get to the truth, because you got to realize there are these people that are sweeping up every breadcrumb as you go. As soon as something is sitting there, the breadcrumbs get swept up, and another piece to the puzzle is taken away and hidden.
They do that, and they've made a very, very good profession out of it too. They've become masters at it. So again, that just always continues to take us back to self-realization, going within, listening to your heart, and just doing the best you can with what you got. And that's, it's all a journey. It's all learning. It's all interesting. And, I don't know if it would be as fun if we knew everything. Maybe it'd be funner. Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. It's just fun to tease the brain with this information.
And so, Grizzly made a great statement. What really makes the experts experts? It's because they're put there by the powers that be. They have basically signed on for the official narrative, and they're going to push the official narrative. That's what makes them the experts, because they're the ones that are giving us the manufactured story. They're giving us the lies and the falsehoods and covering up the real truth. And so, we recognize that now. And, I've seen it in action as well, going to seminars and the like, and, seeing how it works. And it's all part of the system. It really, really is all part of the system. And DNA mapping is fascinating as well. And, it's a double-edged sword. Am I glad I had mine done? I think I am. Even though I recognize it could be used against you, and it probably is being used against you, it's just fascinating to look at it. So, this is talking about a DNA atlas of Ireland. And, again, the Romans didn't affect Ireland as much as so many other areas because, again, the Romans conquered most of Europe and so gave them their system and all. So the Irish DNA is a little bit more streamlined than some of the other people that are on the mainland Europe. But it's fascinating to look at these things. The Basque people is something we could talk about as well because the Basque have a really interesting genetic background. And so when I got mine done, I don't know of any ancestors of mine that are, a Viking background. And yet there was a big chunk of it in there in my history. And so, that got me reading deeper. And you realize the Vikings did so many raids all the time. And, they'd snatch some pretty young ladies and take them back to be their wives. It's part of what was done in human history always, unfortunately. And they'd also, rape, pillage, and plunder. And so there's an awful lot of Nordic DNA in Ireland as well. So that was a big surprise for me. Really, really was. And there's something about my DNA that doesn't add up because my father, his father was completely Mexican. And yet, when you look at my DNA structure, so that should be like 25% because it was 50% of my dad's. It's not the case, and it doesn't seem to add up. So I think our history doesn't add up is what the bottom line is.
No, it doesn't. And it goes back to that old saying, when something doesn't make sense, it's usually not true. So, but thank God, we do have the internet now, so we can go down these rabbit holes because not everybody has these old books. And I think there's already been a book burning of sorts, and even you can't even find all the information you need online because they're taking down some of that information too. So it is really a blessing that we can get together and go over this now.
And, there's so much more to get into this. And Sweetgrass says, follow the Basque farther back and you'll find some fascinating info. Oh, yeah. You just get deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole, It's just deeper and deeper and deeper. And, Fire Harmonic says he has some Viking ancestors, doesn't feel proud of it. And they weren't the only ones that were doing that type of thing, for sure. The Romans did it in a very organized civil way, I guess you could say, imposing our modern civilization upon us. It's just fascinating stuff. And yes, DNA is constantly changing, especially if you had visitors, which we have, both Cindy and I. So guys, this is fun stuff, fascinating stuff. I'd love to go down this rabbit hole more with you guys in the future. Thank you guys for, always joining us. We love you guys.
We do love you guys. We so appreciate you coming and being here and sharing the high vibration and information. God bless and namaste.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much for your support. As always, God bless, stay safe, and namaste.